We got to hear stories from guys that have done it in the field where they blow it up or they shoot it, right? It's like when you're in that moment, you got to go. There is no time to work out where in the menu this thing lives. And it just wasn't intuitive, right? Now it's 1,000 targets a minute or 2,000 targets a minute. You're on to make decisions when a human needs to be checked against something. I'm not watching it in the same way I used to. You make mistakes at the interface layer that lead to like mission critical problems. If that's out there and being used, it will erode trust in the technology. Technology can win demos, but it doesn't win in the field.
Hello, welcome to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm joined by Matt McElvogue, Vice President of Design for Teague. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, dude.
All right. Well, we'll get into what Teague is. We'll get into some of these things, but Vice President of Design for, a defense tech design company. How did you find yourself coming into this role?
I won't go too far back because it'll be forever, but it's, I came up as a designer, like software designer, design researcher. And early enough on in my career, I got involved in a very complicated sort of enterprise software, right? Things where you're kind of building on top of other platforms, other people's equipment, and you got to make that all integrate and still make sense to an end user or operator. So I found a sick joy in that complicated kind of mess that I got to work in. And I think a lot of those same problems show up in defense. So over the last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of work in autonomy. Now a lot of those conversations are AI oriented. And I've been doing a lot of work in like wearables, rugged devices, vehicles, beyond kind of the consumer space, and have ended up landing in defense. Teague's always been kind of involved in defense, but the last couple of years with all the investment and focus going on there, it's become a bigger part of our business. So that's sort of my personal journey. And I mean, I've been a military history geek and had many family members that were military, police, and it's kind of fun to align being able to support them with the work I do as well, right? So that helps.
Oh, that's cool. And so how long have you been with Teague?
Been there about 10 years. Teague is coming up we're in the anniversary year for 100th year of operating, right? So we've been around 100 years, so no spring chicken. By dint of that, we've evolved all the time. We're always working on what we call like the frontier. So working human-centered design, so designing for people, be that physical or digitally, where can that show up that's sort of new to that and that need. So that's why I think we're working in defense now. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But Teague's about 200 people. We are engineers, prototypers. We build mock-ups and functional prototypes. We're designers, so like people that design physical products, digital products, as well as researchers, strategists, futurists, and we have developers that we have on staff that help us, build what we're designing. So we have this philosophy of thinking through making. So as we're designing, we're always standing up things that we can be testing, and we're very iterative, try to get outside of PowerPoints wherever we can.
What's wrong with PowerPoint?
Nothing's wrong with PowerPoint. I say that, but we still do a lot of PowerPoints. It's always good to feel and live inside of a thing, right? I'll give you an example. We just deployed a 3-story space station mock-up for a company called Starlab. And that's down at Johnson Space Center now. And that's being used to test like integration of equipment that don't need to get on the station. Everything has to go through an airlock. So it means things for then then you've got to actually set it up and put it up there and all that kind of stuff. And then it's used for training like of new kind of astronauts or people going up that won't be trained in the traditional astronaut sense. So they're using it for training. But we built a 3-story mock-up. We helped design that. One of the first times we set it up, it's even though it was on the spec that this is the height of the ceiling and this is what we're going to do. When you're in it, you feel it and you realize that. So when we had a lower fidelity version in our facility up here, all the stakeholders walk through and they're like, man, we got to make the ceiling taller, right? So you catch things that are hard to see when you're just in CAD or just in the requirements, So that's why we like to build things.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Well, cool. So as you guys have gotten into defense, we've had, actually give me from your perspective in defense, so we've got the big prime contractors. I think defense is starting to shift. We're seeing the defense Texas ecosystem really pivot towards smaller companies. As you look like kind of from a design perspective, who owned that capability and criteria? Is that all done at the primes and then pushed down? And how has that shifted over time, or has?
I mean, I do think you're seeing some of the new players come in with a more modern approach to sort of the experience design layer, where they're bringing in expertise from like the FANG companies, right? So FANG, I mean, like your Facebooks and your Googles and those kind of groups. They're coming in and they're bringing like kind of more modern ways of building things, building technology. Modern's a stretch, right? Like there are very modern things that happen at the older primes, but they are bringing in a different perspective. Maybe we'll net out at that, and they are bringing in different like sort of processes and ways you stand things up and the ways you evolve things. I think you've seen similar stuff in space with like SpaceX, what they've been able to do to disrupt and then become a very important part of our space strategy as a country, right? And all those kinds of things. And what that's doing is it's they're forcing the older primes to kind of evolve the way they think about standing things up and the way they compete for contracts. Because at first, it's like they were small, they maybe weren't involved in the same conversation, so they weren't winning contracts, but they are now winning major contracts. Or you have companies like Palantir and Anduril that are becoming a part of the woodwork. They're not a new player anymore; they're an established player. So, and they're growing very, very quickly. So yeah, we've been in the middle of that, and we've seen them just kind of in a good way, like they're having to learn, but then they're also forcing older players to evolve and look at things in a new way.
Yeah, and how has this new approach, Silicon Valley, for example, in our pre-chat, we talked a little bit about, Apple's famous for, right, their product. They are product first, designed for human interaction. How are you seeing that impact, Department of War things? Are they seeing the value in that design, value prop? Or are they still just looking for the end widget capability and that's not really built in? Are you seeing that change at all? Or?
I do see a change. I think, generally in the world, our lives have become much more like technology driven over the last like 20, 30 years, right? And people that have grown up with iPhones are now in procurement positions and positions of power, right? And iPhone's an easy sort of stereotypical one to point to. But what I mean when I point at that is like just modern intuitive software and physical product. And, I think those influences on us have made us look at the technology we have on the military side just very differently, right? It's like, hey, that's not going to work anymore, right? Like we worked on a product that was replacing something that we used by like JTAC kind of guys. A lot of the time it's for calling in like 9-line bombing runs, like things like that, right? So it's getting MGRS like grid coordinates and stuff like this. And one of the things you have to do if you ever have to leave that device somewhere is zeroize it. And it was so complicated to zeroize this. We got to hear stories from guys that have done it in the field where they blow it up or they shoot it, right? It's like when you're in that moment, you got to go, right? There is no time to work out where in the menu this thing lives. And it just wasn't intuitive, right? It didn't follow modern paradigms of on your iPhone, to go to settings, you have a search function that can find you anything in settings, right? And that just didn't exist. So despite the kind of rote training we'd done, like, hey, this is how you do it in a classroom before someone ever got to use it, in that mission critical moment, it wasn't intuitive. It didn't surface. It wasn't contextually aware of what was happening. So it wasn't surfacing different functionality like you would expect with a modern interface. So, some of the higher ups were mortified to hear that they were shooting or blowing up what is like a $5,000 device. And I think the people that are now in positions to sort of say who they want playing in the contracts and they know what's out there and they're more in touch with the new sort of supplier base, they're inviting in different perspectives and different competitions. I just think it's that we've all kind of grown up in a more technologically advanced world, and now we're demanding that that's a part of our soldiers' lives as well.
Yeah, I think that's important because I have seen, I had Aura Ring on one of the podcasts, like the wearables, for example, and bringing in human performance. So where are you normally, if someone reaches out, where are you and where should you be brought into the process?
It's a good one. We have a blend, right? Like, I often the most common one is they've hit a problem, right? Like we'll say sort of to people that are coming in new, it's like, we get the call when they drop the ball, right? Is normally when it's happening. So with some of the sort of older primes, they might realize there's a new competitor that's going in for the same bid. They're an incumbent player, and they'll call us to like help them show up in a more modern way, help them advance their software and rework their systems so that they can compete, right? That's one of the times we're brought in. We're brought in by newer players that want some like different perspective, right? Or a broader perspective. They like that we work with the older primes as well, right? So they know that we are both have our foot in like what is new and on trend, but also understand how to like navigate their kind of political environment and the way they operate, right? That we do that. We're, like I said, we're 100 years. We've worked with Boeing for 80 of those 100 years continuously. So we know how to navigate large companies and communicate to get things done, right? We like to be brought in as early as possible. If we are able to look at sort of a technical requirements document and at the same time either influence that document through research and study of the user and how they really operate and do things, that helps us kind of like take a more, with our partner companies, a more forward-looking approach to the technical requirements document. At the minimum, we like to come in, even if we can't influence that document heavily, sort of make sure that everyone's aware of like the best way to compete is have essentially alongside that an experience requirements document, like what needs to be true of the experience while serving the technical requirements. Sometimes we can be brought in too late and we'll still do a lot of damage and help you. But if that stuff has gotten too baked and there's decisions made in the technology that have closed doors to actually advancing things, that can be a challenge as well. So, but we get involved wherever. We're happy to be involved. It's always a good day when someone calls us to like help, and we roll our sleeves up and help. But the earlier, the better is a general rule of thumb, I would say.
I mean, obviously the prime's less of an issue, but with smaller companies, I guess that's probably the big question, right? It's like, when do we bring in this cost? Because we don't know when. How do you guys work with that? Just out of curiosity. I mean,
We find in defense, like even those companies can be well enough funded that you can do a lot with us, right? Like we are a premium kind of service you bring in, but we say, one of our defense related sales guys has this saying, it's like, it can be a couple of weeks for a couple of bucks. Like there can be a shorter version of working with someone. We find that we can be very cost effective, like early on when they're still kind of like getting the snowball going on contracts with the government and the kind of funding that then unlocks them building their own team. We're kind of mercenaries, right? We can come in and be your design team and help you understand how to integrate design into your process. And then we're very comfortable with that evolution where you hire your own designers and you only call us when there's like some new challenge or difficult thing, that we look at that as success, right? So we've been doing work with a really cool autonomous drive company called Overland AI. They started at looking at doing like autonomy for off-road as a robotics and automation problem. Very quickly, they got interest from DARPA and the DOW and everyone else. And when that interest started showing up, that's where the contracts started coming from and the funding money and everything else. And we're getting to a point now where they have a product team. We're still sort of bringing designers to help boost that team or do some of the more difficult challenges. But there'll come a day when they have their own product team and we'll be pumped for them and we'll watch from the sidelines and be excited that they're being successful. So, we come in and meet you where you're at and we'll grow with you and sort of make sure that there's a way that we can work with you. We like to say we're a bit like, what kind of blue collar around that thing. It's like, we get it. Let's just talk about how we can help. It's like,
you correct me. A designer, I guess that'd be right. You have a lot of analogies of the blue collar.
hey, it's analogies or it's acronyms, man. Like both sides are bad.
I think they're great.
Okay, good.
All it helps provide color and context, right? I mean, that's you in your mind can see some. I am not a design kind of guy. Like my wife will ask me something. I'm like, when I see it, I can go, I like it or I don't like it, but I cannot envision anything. So
My wife is the one, like, I'm a designer, but I'm a systems designer. I'm not like, when it's like the living room and what we're going to paint it, that's all her, like I don't think that way either.
so you said you work for Boeing. I'm just curious because I've had some experience in Boeing airplanes and Airbus. That one seems like the least of all the kind of the big airplane companies, the least that brings in human design compared to like an Airbus. Now, granted, that's a probably a much bigger scale. I don't know if that's rampant throughout the company, but
It can depend drastically what airline you're flying, right? When we work with Boeing, we do a couple of things. We do work with them on product development. So thinking about like future product. These are sort of like 10-year runtime kind of projects, right? Right now, we're thinking about how do we weave in better accessibility on the plane, right? So think like more dignified experience for people with like limited mobility, or, it might be like, blind or low vision or hearing impairment, right? Because they're trying to work ahead of like possible requirements, forcing them to like advance in that way. We do security related stuff with them around the cabin. We do work with them on the Boeing defense and space side, looking at like how they modify commercial planes for defense applications and center the user in like the design of like workstations that end up on a plane, or areas where collaboration's taking place on think like a sort of operational level control kind of playing big radar dishes and stuff like that. So we do those kinds of projects with them. We also do all of their baseline architecture work. So we think through like what is going to be an architecture and wiring and like systems capability that's going to set you up for the future. And then we work with some of their airlines to then like convert that into something that feels more kind of like branded, sort of about the experience and the ops model that that airline has. And we do a lot of that work, but normally we're involved in, I'd say, we do everything, right? From like, sort of back of cabin to front of cabin, but normally where an airline's spending more money is on like your first class, your lay flats, the flagship kind of products. So maybe it's an 87 that you're converting. So we'll work with them in all those kinds of ways. So everything from like baseline architecture to like newer product development, depending on what you're flying. And I'm, no judgment on that. It's like, the aviation industry is interesting. You can fly, 40, 50-year-old product, right? So it's interesting from a design challenge point of view. You got to think about that, right? And we just had a guy retire the other day that was here for 46 years working on planes, so it's a crazy realm, like I come from, I interned at Apple, and it's a different, there's new phones every year. So it's a different world than like tech and how quick that can move.
yeah, it's interesting. So how do you look at and design the whole concept of AI, autonomy, human control, human in the loop, on the loop, underneath the loop?
All the terms. Yeah, I'd say it's rapidly evolving nowadays, right? Like we're getting requests from players that we may have worked with in the past or not, where they're like, hey, you remember that thing we did or we talked to you about before where it was like tracking 3 targets a minute? Now it's 1,000 targets a minute or 2,000 targets a minute, like new threats that will require like they're a forcing function to have people go from in the loop, so the human like being a part of all of that decision making. Like, I'm seeing these things, let me click on them, let me choose how to respond, let me say go. Now you're going to get served a lot more of that on the loop, where a lot of that is agentically getting handled, and then you're on to make decisions when a human needs to be checked against something, right? Like maybe it's like a response measure, right? Like a human needs to be sort of confirming that that's happening. That flips what ends up being the interface layer ends up being like where optionality is presented and where decisions are made, right? When confirmation has to happen, that kind of thing. So we're seeing like it's flipping, right? Like it's less like me understanding everything that's happening. Even if I'm firing off like kind of programmed automation, there's a lot more kind of like shared control scenarios where there's like agentic, automated, like truly automated automation, not like stuff I pre-described the behavior of how I was going to do it and said go. Now it's kind of happening without me involved, and the kind of information I have to be presented, because I kind of come in without the context of what's been happening or what's been set up. I'm obviously trained on it and I can be aware of it, but I'm not watching it in the same way I used to. You have to come in and be presented optionality, and that does change the interface layer a lot. It's less like camera systems and vision and all that. That might exist to help me trust that it's working. But then when the optionality happens, I need to be able to quickly understand what, why, where, And if I need to dig in to learn more about something, I need very powerful ways to sort of like drill into more data without being overwhelmed by it when I'm first understanding the context and the situation. So that's flipping things a lot. And I think as AI comes into that and more automation happens with assets in the field and sensing systems, it's putting like even newer pressure on the interface layer because there's so much being done without you being involved that when you come in, it can feel very overwhelming. So we have to help people, trust in those moments comes in our mind from like legibility. I need to very quickly understand what the system is doing. Predictability. So I got like pull these from like work we've done. Predictability is another one, which is I need to know what it's going to do next or what it's proposing, what it might be doing in an automated way, right? I need to know that. And then I also need to understand a really challenging one, which is like recoverability. So if there's a problem before I need to intervene, I need to understand how to do that with the controls I have. And that's a very different challenge than like software and physical product that we've had, for the last 40 years in technologically empowered warfighting, right? So it's good. It's very exciting times. It's putting like new pressure on the kind of work we do to best serve warfighters of all contexts, a person in the field dealing with a physical situation, so someone sitting in a command and control kind of scenario. So we're in the middle of that with the large primes and the new players, and it's been exciting.
Who's driving that innovation more? Is that new players or is it the primes?
I think it's demand from the gov actually, like from like the way they're kind of showing up. They have a very like, especially the last 4 years or so, it is a very much a tech. I mean, really, since Ukraine has kind of kicked off, it's ramped up like even faster. There's a threat and sort of new tech impetus that's forcing like sort of a change in like the demands in the contracting, right? So it's like, hey, what used to be early detection response system for forward operating bases, there's very clear like a new threat there, and there's very clear demand to look at that in new ways from like a tech point of view. That's then cascades all the way through the system. It's your comm system. It's like what radar is doing there. It's like connectivity. It's the people that are actually choosing what sort of countermeasure to respond with, right? It's all getting pressured. And in those contracts, those bids, it's the incumbent players and the sort of older primes that still have tech that they might want to recompete on or with. And it's the new players showing up, right? It's Anduril with Lattice in those scenarios, right? And so I think it's new threat and new push from Gov that then is causing everyone to kind of compete in new ways and build new technology and advance things. So it's working well in that way right now. It feels pretty good.
Is there a specific sub industry, I don't know the best way to say it, where you see that this is tracking more? Is it in the, you know, how to manage automated vehicles that are interacting, with AI? I'll use companies like Havoc AI. They're big on the autonomous, surface level. Is it companies like, is that the where it's changing the most, or
I think those kind of companies, Overland AI, they when it comes to like the R&D and like, exploring new tech, they're faster, nimbler. They don't have the overhead when they're founded to go tackle that problem, and a small amount of funding goes a long way in their exploration. I do find that they are quicker to go after it, right? And sometimes they can be a hammer looking for a nail. They're exploring it because they got excited about it in a way different way than a contract, right? And then they find them and they align to them. But they can often go faster, quicker because R&D spend is just, it's way less inhibited in their world versus like IRAD spending at like a Lockheed or wherever else where there's a lot of kind of conversations and things you have to go through to get that like distributed in ways that would go tackle that. Even though you've fully got the capability, you got the people, it can just be more nimble outside. But I find that inspires when they are getting interest from contracts, that inspires that internal research and development spend to get reallocated pretty quickly, right? When there's a real contract around it. So it's all an ecosystem, but yeah, maybe those players can move a little bit more quickly and kind of go deeper, faster, at least early on when it's not yet a capability that's being like screamed about at the Pentagon, right? But once that happens, then other people get in line pretty quick. So what we like is finding them when they're like pre-contract we can work with them and learn a ton with them and help them win contracts in advance and show up at demo days better and all that. And then we find that that can inspire the work on the sort of older prime side, and it's all a cycle. So, I'm saying everyone's important, and that's true, but it maybe moves a little quicker at some of these smaller, nimble players.
No, I think that's is a great point. I mean, I have VCs on too. The private capital in this model that Andreol started with, maybe even Palantir, but we use outside capital to create the prototype, the concept, the program, then sell it, vice the bigs waiting for IRAD, very little investment of their own dollar. Yeah, because it's got to go to the stock shareholders and all that. So it is a very different model. I think definitely, yeah, a lot faster. In this time of AI, where do you see the biggest risk from a design perspective or time of autonomy?
I think the shared control scenarios and like how you keep the human informed and in control around things like ethics, intent, sort of decision making, like when they need to be involved. That's complicated stuff to like distill down to like how you set up an automated system and how you provision it. And then also how you respond when it is presenting you optionality and informing you about things. So that's a challenge, right? And we are in the early days of solving that as designers and engineers that are focused on those problems. But there's risk in there for sure that you make mistakes at the interface layer that lead to like mission critical problems. That's always been there, right? Like it's just now the speed at which the decision making can happen is adding new kind of risk in there. I think the other one, or the thing that I could hypothesize will happen, is agentic, like AI powered systems will handle so much of like the context awareness and the recombining of capabilities and systems that we will have at the interface layer a new problem that we've never had before, where we'll actually be designing sort of the building blocks of systems. So like how buttons show up, what sliders look like and how they operate and like how you provide input. But we won't actually fully define the interface. Like today, I literally, like when I'm designing a system for someone, think about the unlock on your phone, right? Like it's when you turn it on, it looks like this. Then when you slide this unlock, it looks like this. Then you're at the homepage. You define all of that, and that's how it's then interpreted by a developer to build it in code, and then that's what's delivered. And when you're doing the best job, you're learning about the users and how they want to use it. AI comes with this superpower that it can potentially recombine and fully 100% customize a scenario for an individual's current situation. Like that's the superpower it potentially represents. But as designers, we'll be designing sort of the building blocks that can get recombined in hyper contextualized, hyper personalized situations to help someone deal with a threat or deal with a scenario. But what's interesting is we're essentially designing for a thing we can't imagine. That's an entirely new challenge that I hypothesize will be one that shows up in probably other less mission critical sectors first, but we'll see eventually show up in like mission critical environments like defense and space. And that'll pose its own challenges and risks as well, right? But imagine a really context-aware system with the example I did earlier, where someone's trying to zeroize something. If someone at command control or like a command level person has said, "We're leaving this area, we're going into this retreat state," when that happens, they know, the system knows everything has to get zeroized, so it's going to zeroize anything it can anyway, right? And then it's going to, make sure that there's no sensitive data left behind. Where we still need a human in the loop, like I'm making a decision to bring this equipment with me or not, right? Then when I open that, because everything's in this like awareness mode, that control can surface to the top. You wouldn't ever design a system where zeroize me is a button at the top layer of a piece of equipment, because it has a whole nother job 99.999% of the time. But in the future, we could have systems that recompile or present different options based on really hyper personalized stuff. So you could even do things with like, people with different like sort of mobility, like even people that all get into the military and they're all like good to go, or they've hit our baseline. We all have different sized thumbs and different ways of doing things. And we all have different limitations that you may not know, right? Mental and physical. We'll have interfaces that adapt for those in the future, right? You can't design in that way now because we bake it all, right? When we design and we try to hit the 80%, but in the future, we'll be able to hit everyone sort of more in a more personal way as well. So I think that's kind of where we'll end up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense, but I guess, I mean, it does kind of bring into question as these LLM companies and, you know, let's just talk about what we'll call your job security. But I mean, the design perspective, right? How do you see that evolving of, you know, companies use, because it is maybe, you know, exponentially different requirements that only it may be able to understand.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I do think you'll always have a human in the situation, in the room, if you will, that is helping define the guardrailing. It just, you won't be designing the end product. You might be designing things that then are are designed in a machine readable way to be recompiled, right, by a machine at the interface layer. That's one potential future. I think there'll be a role to play in the sort of requirements documentation sort of side of things as well, to ensure that designers are building machine readable documentation too, right? So that we can be 100% sure that like the intent and the ethics and everything else is protected in the system. You can't like fully remove the human from that scenario. I think then you get into like a different type of risk. Now, from a job security point of view, I think we will be, right now we deploy teams of designers, developers, and it's multiples of each roles because they're all kind of like doing different parts of it. You might see more like AI powered designers where they're like one of one, and an AI powered like person that's looking at the code that's one of one, and an AI powered like researcher one of one. So smaller teams. And for me on my side, that means my sales folks have to find more things, you know, maybe in that, if that future comes to pass, because we'll be working on more projects at a time with like individuals that are maybe AI powered, right? That could be how it plays out if we can get the quality there and everything else. Right now, we're in a transition phase. It's like, you know, the output from these systems isn't maybe where we need it to be for mission critical environments. Even if on the consumer side, you're seeing the beginnings of like apps that are very successful that were mostly designed with AI partners, right? So, you know, it'll come for defense at some point, but as enough regulation and need to like really protect things that we're not seeing it in the cockpit of an F-35 yet or anything like that.
Yeah. That'll be interesting for sure. Because I mean, don't know where it's going to go, but I think, you know, some of that true innovation, you know, at least steering the innovation, maybe not coming up with the end state, you know, will always, at least for the foreseeable future that I can envision, will have that edge to that. Otherwise, innovation will stop once the models kind of all get to where they're
Yeah, it'll
going.
just feed on itself, right? Yeah.
You not box and be able to think something completely asymmetric. No. How about in defense? You know, are we running into problems? You may have already covered a little bit, but where, you know, some of the design decisions with autonomy are going to cause problems, big problems, serious problems.
It's funny. We spend so much time just thinking about like how to achieve it well. I think I may have said it a little bit earlier. I think if you can risk like having the human not aware of what's happening and why. And the problem that will present is will erode trust in the technology. So it's a problem in the sense that like, if that's out there and being used, it will cause like a bad conflict between sort of like what the human is expecting and perceiving and what the machine is doing, right? So like you have to design your systems from a point of view of like trust being the most important thing. Otherwise you're like, it's hard to regain trust, right? It's like, it's not a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, right? Like, and you'll see people kind of hack their way around not using that piece of tech. And the military is littered with people, you know, using their own kind of version of like getting a job done and kind of ignoring the thing that was supplied to them. So we have to be very careful with that, I think. Yeah, and then obviously, like, you know, whenever new technology is brought in, it's it's life and death in certain situations, right? And you have to be thinking about that from as many angles as you can. And it's why even within like sort of the speed that defense moves, which is slow for good reason, to make sure that we are making the right decisions, you have to be like iterating very quickly within those cycles and learning a lot to make sure that like this is really going to work in the field when someone needs it to work, you know? So there's no change there. It's just as the speed of tech moves, that speed of iteration moves more quickly as well, right? So, you know, it whenever there's new technology for all of the great things it brings, you have to be sure that you're not failing in like obvious ways, you know? So you have to test quickly, I would say.
What type of a design do you enjoy the most? Is it software design? Is it hardware design? Is it human interface design?
It's when you combine them, right? Like it's probably my favorite. Like, you know, like I love spending time out in the field. I don't do a lot of it now that I'm vice president, but like spending time in the field with a warfighter that's telling you how it really works, you know, and you're not in the boardroom hearing it from, you know, a one star or the procurement team that have asked for the new tech. It's kind of like taking all that knowledge you got from all the immersion early on in the project. So now you're showing them a demo of like how it would work. That's kind of my favorite. So you'd call that like participatory design. So it's like it's when you're designing with the end user to evolve and iterate very quickly. And you know, we have better tools than ever to like, you know, it used to be that when they looked at a prototype, they would give me feedback and I'd go back for 6 weeks and then come back again with a new one. I might be able to change it overnight now and we try a different iteration of it, right? So that's probably my favorite type of design is when I'm spending time with people that are really going to use the product in the field and trying to like evolve and make changes very quickly to see if we can better serve them.
What is your, like, what's one of your recent favorite projects, programs, and what was the outcome of that you worked on?
Yeah, a recent favorite was I was working with a company called Axiom Space. They are a commercial space station, low Earth orbit, LEO. You call that LEO provider. So like think like ISS will retire in a couple of years and then there'll be a few other stations that sort of take over, right? And we can do experiments and continue doing good work in low orbit. One of the things working with them, they live an astronaut for all the glamour that comes with being an astronaut, there's very unglamorous parts of it. They are they're everything from like the janitor to the repair person to yeah, also the person that gets on a call with the president and gets to show him things moving in microgravity, right? And all the cool stuff that we see. When they're in that like repair person job, they follow procedures, right? And these procedures can be very engineering spec kind of like just text line item, right? And when we were getting a chance to like modernize those systems, we were working with astronauts that were very storied astronauts, like people that had like the most amount of time in space of any American and had done the most EVA walks where you're walking around the space station with the spacesuit outside the space station. And when we're working with them, what's cool about these people is even though they have all that knowledge, they're always interested in like, okay, how do we make it better? How do we evolve it? So we got to work with them on sort of, we kind of colloquially called it like the YouTube generation version of procedures. And instead of like raw text output, and you just have to remember where you are and this is how you do it, we got to bring in like a lot of new like bookmarking features and like video that shows you how to do it on the real thing. A lot of the time in old procedures, you have no images at all. And if you do have an image, it's a screenshot from an engineer's like 3D software and they've literally circled things in paint, which sounds scary, but that's how it's done. Like that's how procedures are done today. So we got to bring in a lot better like imagery, like video that you can watch to understand how it is to like open a panel, pull out other things that you're not focused on to find the problem. And here's how you fix it. And here's the equipment you need. And we got to build in like integrations for like digitally enabled, literally what bag or box is it in on the space station. So you can go find it. And like, you know, when you add all that up and you see someone doing a procedure, even though there's videos they're watching and stuff like this, you're going from something that might take like 4 hours to do, and you're dropping that time down to like an hour or less. And when you're doing that, that's real gains that they can use to do more experiments in space, do other kind of work in space, or I mean, heck, get it good enough they can spend more time just floating around and looking at the earth, right? Like, you know, their days are 16, 18-hour days. So, you know, we're trying to make them more efficient. that ultimately means we can make more money and do more work in space that's useful back on Earth. So that was a recent one that was very fulfilling, probably also because I'm getting to work with astronauts, and that's a boyhood dream, I think, on some level for everybody. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good. We're going to have to wrap this up. I'm going to do a quick lightning round. This is a lot for defense focus. So you can pass. You got 30, no, not only 30 seconds, no comments from me, just kind of level set. So what do you think the biggest myth about selling to the Department of War is?
you have to say things in certain ways. They're all humans at the end of the day. And if you bring a good idea, I think there are people there that want to hear it, right? So there's not the decorum and all the acronyms and all the like ways you got to show up. Sure, it matters a bit, but end of the day, I think they care about what the good idea for the warfighter is.
What's the hardest lesson you've learned while, beginning to work with and continue to work with defense companies?
Bringing design into their process and like the way they do things and speed and sort of the amount of duplicative projects that are all like kind of working towards the same bid and the cost that is and all that kind of stuff. It's like that can combine with a more iterative, faster approach, but you just have to work out how to like kind of fit into that process because that process exists for a reason. So one of the biggest lessons is probably sort of thinking we had some better way of doing things. And maybe there's a more personal one. We've learned how to like kind of fit into that and realize the benefits of both ways of thinking. And that's possible too, right?
What's the normal piece of advice you'd give, you know, executives as you've watched them, building defense tech companies?
I mean, I think center on the warfighter, right? Like technology can win demos, but it doesn't win in the field with the guy that's having to do something. So you have to keep them centered all the way through, right? So bring them into your process, even if you're just wires and breadboard and you're early on, bring them in as quick as you can and have them be centered in part of your stakeholder set.
Okay. What do you think is the biggest opportunity in defense as you've worked with all these different companies?
Very related to the previous one. I think maybe to answer it a different way, I believe like centering users earlier is a great opportunity. I think other ones that I would rattle off is like it's a great time for like starting a company in the space. Like there's just a lot of opportunity and it's a great way to, be entrepreneurial, I think right now. Another one is there's so many exciting dual use applications. So use for like I met recently with a firefighting drone company that was looking at like military applications for like observation and being able to respond in the same way they want in the commercial sector, but then being able to like kind of build that technology for dual use application. That's an exciting kind of opportunity right now as well from a business view, I think.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks, Matt. That's all we have time today, but really enjoyed it. I mean, what a unique perspective into supporting our warfighters and our nation. So if people are interested in learning more about Teague, pulling you guys in for a project, how would they do that?
You can go to our website. That's the easiest. That's just teague.com. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very findable on LinkedIn. So if you have things you want to reach out about, I'm all ears, even if you just want to chat.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate it. We'll see you around the block.
Yeah. Cheers, Dave. Thanks.